Hey everyone, Mr. Tweet here. So let's talk about externalities real quick. The thing with externalities is positive or negative. In both cases, the wrong quantity of something is being produced by the free market. In the case of negative externalities, there's a cost that's just being kind of dumped onto society. Everybody else has to kind of pay for it. And so this is where like kind of like a lot of like air pollution or water pollution or things like that. Like a lot of those kinds of things would fall under this. So like cigarettes and secondhand smoke would be an example of an externality, right? Somebody wants to sell cigarettes, somebody wants to buy cigarettes, but then somebody else gets stuck with the negative side effect. Or maybe I want to sell you fireworks and you want to buy fireworks and then you shoot them off in the middle of the night and annoy your neighbors or things like that. So negative externalities, you have a cost that's just being kind of dumped onto everyone else. The person who's paying for the product or selling the product, they're not the ones that are paying this cost, someone else is. And then a positive externality is when you have a benefit that gets dumped over on society. So like, if I hire a landscaper to make my front yard look nicer, all of my neighbors, they get to look at all the flowers and trees as they drive by, so they get enjoyment from that. So there's spillover benefits there. If the property value of my house goes up, then my neighbors, their house values go up as well. So that's like a spillover benefit. So the main idea to understand here is that when we have an externality in the free market, the wrong quantities being produced. That if we took into account the spillover costs, we wouldn't produce as much of those things. And if we took into account the spillover benefits, we would produce more of those things. So like, things like cigarettes are going to be overproduced in the free market. Things like house paint are going to be underproduced in the free market because again, they don't take into account those negative effects and positive effects on other people. Now, when we're talking about something like, like with global warming, um, you know, a, a lot of our decisions have spillover costs onto others. When we start to consider kind of like the carbon that goes into the production of things, a lot of times we go to the 99-cent store and we buy a bunch of cheap crap. The reason why it's so cheap is because part of the production process was that there was costs that were dumped onto everyone else in the form of air pollution or just simply carbon being emitted into the atmosphere, which has negative consequences for everyone else. For any one person, it's like an insignificantly small amount, but when you have 7, 8 billion people on a planet, it starts to add up. So this is kind of a problem that we have in economics, is that it doesn't take into account these third-party costs and benefits. And as our society gets larger and more complicated, and as we kind of start shipping stuff from one country to another, it becomes increasingly impossible for us to understand all of the costs that we're dumping onto other people. And so that means that, as our society gets more complicated, it's going to do not as good of a job allocating resources. Now, this doesn't mean that a command system is better or a planned system is better, but it does mean that we need to figure out a way to kind of adjust for some of these spillover costs and spillover benefits. One way that you adjust for a spillover cost is that you tax the producer of that thing. You make them pay for the negative cost they're dumping onto society. And then some of them are going to say, well, it's not worth it. And then we're going to say, okay, stop producing. That's what we want, less production. It's important to note, though, that when it comes to like negative externalities, most economists are not like, that shouldn't be allowed, right? Most economists, for instance, aren't going to say things like, well, cigarettes should be banned because they have a secondary, spillover cost onto other people. Economists would just say there shouldn't be as much of that thing. So it'd be kind of like the same thing with like air pollution. Economists tend to, we wouldn't necessarily advocate for like a future of no air pollution. We would advocate for the right amount of air pollution, which is going to be less than what the free market gives you, but also non-zero. So that's negative and positive externalities. These spillover benefits and spillover costs into society, they're not factored in by the free market. So it means we're going to have to make a few adjustments. Again, this is another example of how when the free market fails, we need a little bit of a command or planned solution to help make up for that. When it comes to things like air pollution, maybe that means like a carbon tax, so that those producers of that carbon, now they have to pay for it. Well, they might not be so quick to produce it anymore. Alrighty. Anyways, that's externalities. See you guys tomorrow.